How are you doing today? Steve Teel with Very Bold Radio and Podcast. This is kind of part 3 in a series. I talked to my mom and dad about the power of God and how my dad was rescued, was saved in Vietnam from certain death. And now I've got really, I think one of the main reasons, one of the main people that God used to rescue my dad, and that's Bill Jankowski. So first of all, I just want to say welcome. How are you doing today?
Doing very well and very glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here too. It's awesome that it worked out. I thank our producer, programmer, engineer over here, Marksman, for making it happen on a Saturday. We don't usually record then. And thank you for making it happen. It so happened that you're in San Antonio, and then you somehow, I don't even know, I don't have to know, you carved out time to be with us today. So thank you.
Well, it's always good to just be able to do the Lord's work.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and I do just personally want to thank you I really don't think I would have had a dad past the age of 6 years old if, it's kind of crazy to talk about if you hadn't got shot down, if God hadn't dropped you into my dad's life, and then the actions that you guys did and that the Air Force did, I just know my dad wouldn't be around. So I just want to thank you for being a part of this dramatic, beautiful story, and thank you for being a part of God letting me have a great and awesome dad.
Well, it is, and the Lord had a hand in it. That's all that you can really say. And it was just an honor to know your dad and be able to, like you said, even though the situation was a little different, but just being able to be there to be able to help people out.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, Bill, there's a lot in your life. I feel like we could probably talk for days, so we have to kind of narrow it down. But I also would like to talk about the experience Bat 21. If you could tell us a little bit about that. And one of the reasons is, that was a very famous part of Vietnam. Now, a lot of people won't know what that is. A lot of people would not have seen the Gene Hackman, Danny Glover story that was based that on the true story. I think they took some liberties, right?
Yes.
And it was turned into a couple of different books. So it's just a very famous thing, and you're a huge part of that. Can you tell us about that, especially for somebody who has no idea what Bat 21 is?
Okay. Well, in Vietnam, in the April of 1972, the North Vietnamese regular army started a push into South Vietnam. And they had 30,000 plus troops that came across the DMZ, the demilitarized zone up north, with tanks, with artillery, and then with troops. And so we had been flying. I was a forward air controller at the time, and what that was you went to find targets, and then you put in airstrikes on those enemy targets to destroy them, with fighter airplanes.
Yes.
So we really hadn't been able to see the ground for almost 2 weeks because that time of the year was the monsoon season, and so rains and that had come in and just low clouds. So I was up flying, I think it was the 2nd of April, and I was up near the demilitarized zone, and I didn't really know who else was there because, I had my mission to do to find targets to destroy. But there was a B-52 flight that was going to be going in up above me into the DMZ, where the North Vietnamese had moved down a bunch of surface-to-air missile sites, called them SAMs, SA-2s.
Okay.
And that range now, they had probably about a 30 to 40-mile range on those missiles.
Wow.
So that coverage had never extended that far into South Vietnam before.
Wow.
And we really didn't know it.
Okay.
So this, along with the B-52s that went in, there were support airplanes. And they were called EB-66s. They were electronic warfare airplanes. And plus some F-105, what are called wild weasels, which had missiles that targeted radars.
Okay.
So the EB-66s were going to come in and find out where those radar sites were, and that being is that they would allow those radar sites to tag their airplanes, and then they would get, by triangulation, be able to get where the sites were actually located, be able to pass those coordinates to the wild weasels, and be able to then have the wild weasels attack them to take down the radars, which then effectively shut down the surface-to-air missile sites.
Wow, okay.
Well, this EB-66, by a call sign of Bat-21 Bravo.
Okay.
Every airplane that flew in Vietnam had a call sign.
Okay.
And with that call sign, if it was a single seat airplane, it was just, if anything happened, you would just use like Bat-21. But because the EB-66 had 6 people, then what they did was they put a letter designated. So the pilot was Bat-21 Alpha, navigator Bat-21 Bravo, and then there was 3 or 4 electronic warfare. So they would have been Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Fox.
Yeah.
Well, I was up flying, and then all of a sudden I just heard on guard, which is an emergency radio frequency that was broadcast. All the radios for the Air Force and the Army were tuned to that automatically so that you could get out emergency situations. And all of a sudden I heard on the guard frequency, Sam, vicinity of DMZ. And so one of the things that we did was you just rolled the airplane over and dove low to try to get out of coverage, and you basically would try to go into the missile so it would go by you. But I leveled off and then looked up and saw the smoke trail from a SAM, an SA-2 missile. And as I watched it go up in the air, all of a sudden I just saw a huge fireball in the sky, and just knew right away what had happened, that one of our airplanes had been hit. So I turned and started heading toward that where I saw it. And as I got closer, I just saw this burning airplane come spiraling out of the sky.
Wow.
And probably, a minute or two later, I hear a call, a thing on the radio that just says, "Mayday, Mayday, this is Bat-21 Bravo."
Wow.
And, I had also gone up when I saw this, "Mayday, Mayday, airplane down, vicinity of the DMZ," because that would start rescue forces. It would start command posts trying to, get people alerted and get people airborne that would be able to try to, do a rescue.
Yeah.
Well, as I, so I come up on the radio and say, Bat-21 Bravo, this is, my call sign was Bilk 34. And I said, hey, I'm in the vicinity. I see the airplane, because by that time had gotten over near the airplane and just watched it. Like I said, there was a lower cloud deck, probably about 3,000 feet, and just saw the airplane go in, and, then just saw the black smoke come up through the clouds, from where the airplane had crashed. And, I said, hey, Bat-21, I'm in the area, do you see me? And so I'm looking down at these clouds, and he goes, "Yes, I see you." And I'm thinking to myself, boy, his eyesight's pretty good, where I can't even see the ground, but he can look up. And I said, "Say again, you can see me?" And he goes, "Yeah, I've got you." And
wow.
Then I go, "Okay, all I see is clouds." And then all of a sudden he goes, "Well, you're below me." And
Whoa.
I go, "Below me?" And all of a sudden I looked up, and here was his parachute coming down.
Oh my gosh.
So I just started circling the chute to just, keep him in sight.
Yeah.
And just watched him disappear into the clouds.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of instrumentations on the O2. I flew an O2 called a push-pull Cessna. It's a Cessna 337 that the Air Force had leased from Cessna for this forward air control mission. So I took a couple of cuts off of TACAN stations, which were navigation stations. And because the area that I was in, I was west of a town called Quang Tri, which that played a part later on, a month later.
Right.
But, and there were just west, there were some karst mountains that went up to about 2,500 feet. So they were just below these clouds. But as I took these two cuts and plotted it on the map, okay, well, we're west, or we're east of hopefully where these mountains start. So I just started a slow circular descent where, you know, he went into the clouds and broke out probably about 900 feet above the ground.
What does that mean, broke out?
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know.
Went through the clouds.
Okay.
And then at 900 feet above the ground, the clouds disappeared and you were in the clear.
Okay.
So that's broke out coming through the clouds.
Okay, I see.
And there right below me in the field was his chute.
Wow.
But he had landed right in the middle of this North Vietnamese invasion.
Oh my gosh.
As breakout and flying around, there were just tanks and trucks and all of that on these roads. And he had landed right near a little village called Cam Lo, which had one of the only bridges that they could use to get all of their vehicles across. So needless to say, it was sort of like the 4th of July, that there were tracers and bullets coming up. So what I did was I kept circling because the river had a very definitive bend in it.
Okay.
So I just kept circling, and we'd pop into the clouds, and I'd take a look at the map and then pop back down.
Oh my gosh.
To be able to get an accurate mark of an accurate position of where he was down, so that could be reported.
Wow.
But yes, later on, that SAR lasted, I want to say, 14 or 15 days. And yes, it was probably one of the, most publicized search and rescue missions in Vietnam.
And I believe my dad was good enough to put together some of the story. And he said that, there were costly efforts to do so, to extract, and we're talking about Lieutenant Colonel Gene Hambleton, correct? And so my dad said that costly efforts to extract him due to the enemy activity that you talked about, and 11 days resulted in 5 U.S. aircraft destroyed, 11 men killed, and 2 captured. And then Hamilton was finally rescued by U.S. Navy SEAL and his Vietnamese comrade on April 13th.
Right.
And brought to a safe area of friendly forces. Is that
right?
Yeah.
They lost one helicopter, and that was the most. I think there was 6 or 7 that died on that. It was the Air Force called them Jolly Greens, HH-53s, and they were used in the search and rescue effort. That was the main helicopter that would go in and rescue folks.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple of FACs. And in fact, one of the forward air controllers that was shot down flying an OV-10 was a man by the name of Bruce Wilson, who was actually a classmate of mine in pilot training. And he eventually, he was one of the ones that was killed. But yes, it was interesting times.
Interesting times.
But, that was one of the things is, as a flyer, and this was Air Force, Army, Navy.
Yes.
If you were shot down, the one hope that you really had was that everything was going to be done to try to rescue you.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was one of the questions that came up. Well, this was one person, and, well, we try to save our own. We don't let anybody be behind.
Yeah. Wow. And if you hadn't been there and you hadn't, I mean, it seems kind of miraculous that you were not shot down when you were trying to track him and they're shooting at you and these tracers, things that I don't exactly know what that means, but that's okay, right? Yeah. I'm sorry for my Air Force and Army and Marine people that are listening and are like, why is this idiot interviewing Bill Jankowski? So just help the rest of us out. So. Yeah. Okay, and then and I'm grateful for my dad putting these notes together. It says, and you just kind of catch us up, and I know we're going to get to the part of the story where you and my dad meet up, but my dad said that after April 2nd, you alternated between flying forward air control operations from Da Nang into the Quang Tri area and serving on the ground as Air Liaison Officer ALO in the South Vietnamese 3rd Infantry Division's Operations Center in the Citadel of Quang Tri City.
Right.
And then I think he's talking the 5th Ranger Group had been airlifted from an area west of Saigon and near the Cambodian border on April 4th to reinforce the division. And my dad's words, we entered the battle on April 6th. Can you kind of take it from there?
Okay. Well, what happened was because of this overwhelming force that the NVA had, 30,000 troops plus the tanks and artillery, the South Vietnamese just didn't have the manpower or the strength to be able to hold positions.
Okay.
So they all started falling back, and their first point was going to be go to Quang Tri. Because that was the command post area and it was called Military Region 1, was the DMZ and then south, and then it went all the way down to the southern coast of Vietnam to Military Region 4, I think is what it was.
Yeah.
But so those guys on the ground where your dad was with that 5th Army Ranger Division, they just started falling back and going south. And in talking to your dad, they actually were going to go to the city of Hue, which was one of the old capitals of South Vietnam.
Okay.
And that's where they were going to regroup because that was a headquarters also for some of the South Vietnamese Army folks. But so as the 1st of May came around, the North Vietnamese had gotten close enough to Quang Tri where it was decided that we were going to evacuate Quang Tri.
Okay.
And I had just been up there the week before, so when all of this was coming, and my roommate there at Da Nang had replaced me. So when this order came down that we were going to get all the Americans out of Quang Tri, I said, hey, I want to go because, my roommate's there. So in case anything happens, I want to be up in the air to help out.
Wow.
So we did the planning, and then the 2nd of May is when we said, okay, we're going to do that. And they planned it for the afternoon so that, everything could get ready.
Yeah.
And what we actually had divided it up, there were 3 of us forward air controllers. One guy was stationed on the north side of Quang Tri, one about in the middle, just west, and then I was just southwest of Quang Tri. Because, again, of not really knowing where the extent of where the NVA forces had penetrated down to.
Yeah.
So we were probably there, got on station, meaning that you were up in the air to be ready for when the helicopters and the rescue forces starting to come in.
Okay.
So I got on station and just, because I was a forward air controller, started looking for stuff on the ground. And all of a sudden, I start seeing, and this was something that after a while, as you got used to your eyeballs, what I say, get caged for what you see on the ground.
Yeah.
And so I started seeing trails leading into clumps of trees, which told me there were command posts. There was a river just south of Quang Tree, and all of a sudden I saw trench lines along this river. And so as I'm flying around, all of a sudden I get a call from this American who goes, "Hey, Fac, overhead, can you hear me?" And it was your dad.
Really? Oh,
and
wow.
and so I come up on Fox Mike and go, "Yeah, hey,
Wow.
I'm in the area. What do you need?" And so he just started explaining what it was, and then to make sure, I said, "Well, hey, make sure I'll rock my wings if you see an airplane rocking his wings, to make sure you're talking to me and not another Fac." And so he goes, "Yeah, I've got you rocking your wings." So
Yeah.
I found their position, and then that's when he relayed the information about that they were going to be trying to cross the river to go to Way.
Yeah.
And so I said, "Well, hey, I'll start looking more." And so
Wow.
I started pointing out all of these things to him, giving him coordinates. And then all of a sudden we get a call saying, "Hey, the mission up north is going to start." And so I said, "Hey, I've got to leave for a little bit. Got something going up north, and but I'll be back afterwards."
Wow.
And what they had done was to be prepared in case anything happened at Quang Tree. There were probably 5, 6, 7 sets of fighter airplanes that were in, fully loaded, fully armed with bombs, that in case anything happened and they needed some close air support, these airplanes would be right there at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
So there were a stack, and what it was you had an IP point or just a holding point, and then these airplanes would just at 1,000-foot intervals just stay there so that they were readily available.
Okay.
So the operation started at Quang Tree to evacuate, and they got all of the Americans out. And so as we get the call on the radio saying, "Okay, the last helicopter's just lifted, everything's gone well." So I said, "Okay." So I went back to find where your dad was with the 5th Arvin Ranger Battalion. And so
You didn't have to do that, but you did.
Well, that's, as a forward air controller, that's what your job was to support the people on the ground.
Yeah.
Whether they were Americans or Vietnamese, that was it.
Yeah.
So I got in contact with them and then just said, "Hey, I've got all these fighters," because what I had done prior to the rescue going on, I had called up. There was an airplane called an ABCCC, an Airborne Command and Control Post is what it was. But I had called up them and had told them that I had found lots of targets, and that if we didn't use all the air, then I would want to work all these fighters afterwards. So that's what happened, was I went back, got in touch with your dad, and said, "Well, hey, I'm going to start putting these airplanes in on all these targets to try to help you out."
Wow.
To get rid of these positions that are south of you, because they actually were south of where your dad was and the area where they were going to be going to.
Yeah.
So I work all of these fighters. It was 5 or 6 sets of fighters I put in on different ones. And
Sets of fighters?
okay, they were called 2 ships.
Okay.
So that was the basic. There were 2 ships or 4 ships, but for this, the fighters would just fly in pairs and
Okay.
just call it a two-ship.
Okay.
And that's a
Okay.
set.
Okay.
a
Got
set
it.
of,
Got
of
it.
fighters.
Just learning.
Right. Okay. And it just so happened that the last set of fighters, the last two-ship of fighters that I worked, was a pair of F-8s off of a carrier. Well, they were carrying 750-pound bombs. Most of the Air Force carried 500-pound bombs. And there is a big difference when they go off on the ground. And it actually, when I worked these, and there was a little bit of, the Navy has a little bit different nomenclature than what the Air Force had. And with the Navy, I tried to use port and starboard because they don't really know left and right. So they react quicker to port and starboard.
Oh, wow.
But work these bombs, and a Mark 82, a 500-pound bomb, makes a bigger hole. It penetrates more.
Okay.
So, but these 750-pound bombs spread out because the fuse is a little it quicker impact. So these were huge craters.
Yeah.
Well, it actually later on that evening, or I guess the next morning, as your dad and I were, as we were escaping, evading,
Yeah.
we came across those, and I realized that we had been heading into the NVA area, and so we actually, those two craters
Whoa.
got us to where we needed to go northeast from where we were, because we were probably heading right into a North Vietnamese command post area.
Wow. You saw that. You knew, okay, we got to go. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. All right. Go on. This is amazing.
Well, when you ran out of fuel, or we had, as you watched your fuel, there was a fuel that you would call bingo fuel, meaning, all right, you couldn't work anymore. You had to return to base to be able to refuel, or you were going to run out of gas.
Yeah.
So I told your dad, I said, hey, I'm bingo. I'm going to have to go back and get gas, but I'm going to pass all this information on. There was another FAC who would be coming up to forward air controller.
Thank you. Okay, got it. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, FAC, forward air controller.
Yeah. I'm with you now.
But that would be replacing me, but I would pass him all of this information, and then he would be able to, put in more airstrikes and help him. Well, I turned the airplane, and, there's another little part of it. When I flew by myself, the O2 had two seats. They were side-by-side seats. And I always took out the other seat, because in the O2, if anything ever happened, the door was on the right side to get out of the airplane, but we flew the airplane from the left seat.
Yeah.
So I took out that seat because the door had been modified to where there was just a handle on it that you would pull the handle. It would drop the bolts out of the door, and you could just push the door out of the airplane to be able to jump out. The other thing that I always used to do was, in the O2, there were two little windows in the back. So I would open up those windows, because as we flew our missions, we basically got shot at just about every time you flew.
Yeah.
And so when the AAA would start going by you, you would hear a clack, clack, clack. And so then you would just start moving the airplane a little bit more. We called it jinking. You would just jink the airplane, and all that was you didn't really just fly nice, easy circles. You would just be a little erratic.
Yeah.
Because it just caused a little bit of trouble with the people on the ground trying to shoot you.
Yeah.
But I turned out to go feet wet, because, again, feet wet, nobody out there to shoot you and things like that. So it was the safest way to get back to Da Nang.
Yeah. Because
Da Nang was right on the coast.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, the whole front of the airplane exploded.
Wow.
It was just flames, and I want to say my training was such that, man, I knew what to do. But, my first thing was, boom, I got to get to the door.
Yeah.
And, the seat belt. And then it was,
Wow.
all right, let's slow down a little bit. And my foot had sort of slipped through. The explosion actually blew part of the floor away.
Oh, my gosh.
But what I realized was that the rear engine was still flying, was still operating. And, whoa, this is, okay. So I went over, got out, unbuckled, went over to the door, jettisoned the door. And as I was doing this, I turned north because that's where your dad was. And when this happened, I was by that river where I had seen a whole lot of enemy activity.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get back up north near where your dad and the 5th Army Arvin Ranger Division was. Because at least I knew that was sort of friendly territory there because they had come through and, this stuff was coming from the west.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking out the door because the whole front of the airplane is just smoke and flames.
Wow.
And I get going, and finally the rear engine quits. And as I'm looking, I go, well, this is about where they should be.
Yeah.
And I jumped out of the airplane.
Wow.
And, there again, I want to say the good Air Force training of everything went well. But as I jump out and going down, I go, oh, wait a minute, there's something else I got to do. And we always flew with a parachute, and our parachute has a ripcord, which is a lever that you pull that releases the parachute out of the back. So, oh, wait a minute, I got to do this. I pull the ripcord, and the chute pops, and you're trained. You look up at it, make sure that it's a good blossom chute and things like that. And then it's one of those things where you talk about when your adrenaline is really going, that things sort of slow down in slow motion. And as you learn to fly, one of the things that they teach you is to trim the airplane up to straight and level flight where your hands off. And so, try to do that. Well, I'm watching, and I look out in front of me, and here's my airplane out in front of me, just sort of gliding, just flaming like everything. And I just watch the airplane just do a 180-degree circle and crash, just put it in. And about that time, I then looked down again and whoa. So I was being blown back south where I didn't want to go toward the river. And again, the training pops in to where if you take one of the front risers, pull it, it helps the chute to slip air out of it, and it stops that, and you can actually sort of glide. These aren't the modern parachutes where they can do all kinds of things, but so I grabbed the riser to stop that backward thing, and about then it's okay. You're, again, Air Force training for parachute landing is you don't look at the ground because your depth perception coming down at that speed, you just don't have it. It's you look out on the horizon, and then when your feet hit the ground, that's when you do what was called a parachute landing fall. So I did that and get rid of the chute, and I landed probably in, some low bushes that were probably about 3 or 4 feet high.
Okay.
And I was at the bottom of a little ridge as I looked north. And as I looked up north, here were about 3 Arvin Rangers, Vietnamese, telling me to stay down and motioned me to come to them. So I E&E'd, I just, crawled up, ran up to them. And when we went over this ridge line, that's where the main Ranger Division was. And that's where I met up with your dad then, and there was a Lieutenant Steve Nahay and a Captain Bob Berkson. And it was funny. The last time I
Yeah.
met your dad in Amarillo, you know, I said, "Well, do you remember what you told me?" And I said, and he goes, "No." And I said, "Well, you know, you said, well, nice of you to drop in." So, you know, even in wartime, you can have a little bit of humor.
Right, right.
But you know, then it was just, okay, settle down a little bit. They gave me some water and that. And, you know, then your dad comes up and he goes, you know, "Hey, here's the Arvin commander." It was a lieutenant colonel, and said he wants to ask you some questions about where these forces are that you saw, and you know, to just talk to you. So they pulled out a map, and you know, like I said, I had been flying over this area for a couple of hours, so I knew pretty well where everything was.
Wow.
So I just started showing them all these different places.
Wow.
And then,
Amazing.
I don't know, it was, you know, maybe within 10 or 15 minutes, the forward air controller, the FAC that was going to replace me, showed up. And so, you know, I get on the emergency radio that we had and said, "Hey, I'm on the ground, and, you know, come and get me."
Yeah.
Because the search and rescue folks that had evacuated Quang Tri, they also had some spare. You know, they brought up more. At that time, they were called Sandies, which were the fixed-wing airplanes.
Okay.
And they flew what was called an A-1E, because they could carry a lot of ordnance and different type on the wings. And then the Jolly Green, the HH-53 helicopters. So there was a 4-ship of the Sandies that were still out over the ocean, and they had one Jolly Green there. So the FAC, the airborne FAC, gets a hold of them, and when we did the initial planning to go into Quang Tri, at that time, it probably isn't there today, but there was a big field that was just south of Quang Tri, probably about 3 or 4 miles, where the helicopters came into that, and then it was just a 360-degree heading, a north heading, and that went right up into the Citadel to where they could get it.
Okay.
So with helping the planning, as I looked at the map when I was on the ground there, I go, whoa, okay, there's that field. All they got to do is come in there and come to me.
Yeah.
So the Sandies get on the radio, and then they operated in 2 ships, like I told you. So Sandy Lead and 2 come in, and they get in contact with me, and I just tell them, all right, go to that field, come straight south, and I will have my mirror, and I'll flash you. And so come in, give them, got your mirror FAC, you know, but then the words that will echo in my memory forever was, "We got to look around." And I go, "You don't have to look around." I said, "Just go get the helicopter, come in, and pick me up." And there again, you know, if you put it into perspective, the Lord's hand was working there, because they came in, they came over us, and then they said, "Well, we're got to look around." And so they turned off to the west, and there was a ridge line that we could see. And as the 2-ship turned to the west and then headed back north, I see a little corkscrew smoke trail come out of the bushes. And all of a sudden, the lead aircraft, boom, it gets hit.
Wow.
And, you know, it's then, okay, Mayday, Mayday, and he turns feet wet, and they got to the ocean, and Sandy Lead had to then jump out of that airplane because it was no longer flyable, but he at least got out of the area. So then it was 3 and 4.
Hmm.
Get on the radio and,
Yeah.
okay, 3, I'm going to tell you the same thing. Go to that field, come straight south, I'll mirror flash you,
Yeah.
go get the helicopter and come out and get me.
Yeah.
So come in, gotcha. Yeah, we got your mirror fac. All right, go get the helicopter. And it was, we got to look around. So by then, there may have been a few expletives that came out.
Right.
But no, you don't. Go get it. And they said, so they do the same thing. Pass over.
Can you just explain for me, like, so why were they saying they got to look around?
Well, before they brought in a helicopter, because non-maneuverable, and even though they carried some machine guns on it, it was very vulnerable to enemy ground fire.
Okay.
And so their job was to ensure that the area was safe to bring the helicopter in, that they were not going to get shot at.
Right.
So that was what they were going to be doing. Is they were going to be looking for any enemy activity to take care of that before they would bring the Jolly Greens in.
And your mindset was, no, you don't, because
I knew what was there.
Yeah.
That from where my position was to the east, there weren't enemy forces there.
I see.
Everything was where I was to the west.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And south.
Okay.
So they come in, and he makes the turn to the west, and he goes over that same ridge line, and all of a sudden I see this little corkscrew, and
oh man,
you know,
gosh,
just a little aside.
Yeah.
We didn't even know that the NVA had these, what were called their shoulder-mounted or shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles at that time. So I had no idea what these things were, but in the second, for number 3, I just at least called break, which, you know, I said earlier, when you saw Sam in the air, that's what you did was, and, you know, to try to get him, but it was too late, and bam, it hits number 3.
Yeah.
And he and his wingman, they at least made it all the way back to Da Nang.
Okay.
His airplane was able to, because I think he had initially started to do a little turn when I called that out. And another little thing was number 4 was a guy that I had been through pilot training with.
Oh, wow.
And so he knew who it was on the ground because of the search and rescue that he and another friend that did that mission had all of our call signs of those that, you know, they had gone through pilot training with, that they knew who was over there. So as they depart, there was silence for probably about, well, I want to say a half an hour, but it probably was more like about 5-10 minutes. And by this time, it's getting a little dark because, you know, all of this had transpired in the afternoon. And the fact comes back up, and he goes, well, you're going to have to spend the night. The Jollies say that they're not going to come in. And so again, it was probably a few little expletives on the radio of, what do you mean they're not? Just go to that field and come.
Right.
And he goes, well, they're going to go back and, you know, do some planning, and then we'll be back in the morning. Or they'll be back in the morning, because I did have, there were forward air controllers flying over us all night.
Okay.
So at that time, you know, your dad was there and hearing this on the radio. And so just about sunset, when things really started getting dark, he comes up to me and he goes, well, and one of the things that was happening while, excuse me, while all of this, the rescue forces were coming in, I had pointed out all of these targets to the FAC that was working, you know, that I was talking to. So all the while the Sandys were doing their work up north, he was putting in more airstrikes south along these positions that I had told him. So your dad comes up and says, well, the ARVN commander wants to take advantage of all those airstrikes and move, through that area because of the disruption. And, so you've got a decision to make.
Oh, okay.
And so he goes, you can stay here and, be by yourself. And, when the rescue forces show up in the morning, they can pick you up, or you can come with us.
Mercy.
So it was...
How long did you have to decide and weigh that out?
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Yeah. What went through your mind? Can you tell us?
Well, it was one of those things of just saying, well, I know there's a whole bunch of, enemy around this area, and
oh my gosh,
at least these guys have been fighting and should know what they're doing on the ground.
Yeah.
Plus, there's 3 Americans here, so I just said, well, I'll go with you guys. And so then when dark came, we started toward the river going south, and that was not having any experience with the Army at that time. Further on in my career, I actually spent some time with some Army units and that. But as we were going along, the South Vietnamese guys, they've got pots and pans, and these are banging, and it's noisy, and and so I'm just thinking to myself, there's lots of enemy soldiers around here. They know exactly where we are because they ought to be able to hear us a half a mile away. So as we go south, there actually were 3 tree lines. So we get to a first tree line and then went into an open field, there was a big agriculture area right there,
okay.
Just being on the coast. And we go across these ag fields, just open fields, and we hit another tree line. And we start into the field in the second tree line, and then everything just exploded. We had walked right into an ambush. Mortars started coming in, machine gun fire. And so initially, your dad and Lieutenant Nahay and Captain Berkson, for their training, they just took off. And so all of a sudden I noticed I'm by myself in this field. And
goodness.
All of this stuff's happening, and I said, well, okay. So I just started walking, and all of a sudden Captain Berkson shows back up and goes, stay with us. So I didn't let go of him. But,
wow.
So we get to the southernmost tree line, which actually was a tree line that led down to the river.
Okay.
So it was just the river brush.
Yeah.
And there was a little path that started going down, and it was a moonlit night. The moon was up full, so you could see pretty well. Well, as we started going, I just noticed that out of all of these ARVN Rangers, what ended up with, there was your dad, the other 2 Americans, and there were 2 ARVN Rangers with us, and myself. That was it.
Yeah.
Had no idea where the other ones had gone to.
Yeah.
But as we were going down this path, all of a sudden, off to the right, a machine gun opens up. And if you've ever done any shooting at night shooting, you usually shoot low. And luckily that's what happened, because there was just a line of bullets from this machine gun that probably hit maybe 15 to 20 feet, right of us, and didn't come. So we all hit the deck, and, then the training of your dad and the other 2, they threw some grenades and they started shooting. And then your dad goes, well, you all wait here. I'm going to just go ahead to see what's there. So he went ahead, and came back and said, "Okay, follow me. We're going to head to the river." So as we head to the river, going along and just roll into this trench where I had spotted the trenches that they were digging, and onto a couple of dead NVA soldiers. And so up there, and then we went down into just the thicket along the river, just bamboo and a bunch of other bushes. And that's where the 6 of us basically then spent the next, 5-6 hours. And while all that, throughout the night, the NVA were just walking up above, and they would just shoot into the bushes and calling out in Vietnamese. And basically what they were saying is, surrender, because we're going to find you in the morning anyway.
Oh my gosh.
And that's what the South Vietnamese guys told us that that they were saying. So that, I guess, is where it comes to. We were just there, and during the night, as we were sitting there, heard tanks south of the river fire up. And so I'm on the radio saying, "Hey, the tanks are fired. We can hear them moving." So the facts that were covering me at night, they put in airstrikes, because all of a sudden you would hear the fighters overhead, and then you would see a flare. They'd pop a flare, which then would illuminate, and so they were hitting enemy troops south of the river all night while we were there. Well, then, you get to where the Lord comes in, and there's a saying, I guess it started maybe World War I or World War II, that there are no atheists in a foxhole.
Right.
And I really say I had grown up in the church, but I really not, and at that time especially, hadn't really practiced, my Christian faith.
Yeah.
But as I was sitting there, it was, well, Lord, if you help me out of this one, I will try to live my life for you.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to me, but after talking to your dad, he was saying the same thing.
Yeah.
That he offered that prayer up to the Lord too. And then something that I didn't know and he didn't know, but apparently you all back where you were at that time, that your church, that there was a youth pastor or something who had said that he thought that your dad needed to be prayed for.
Yes, yeah. I talked to my mom and dad the other day. I interviewed them on Thursday. So, talked about that children's group, and then talked about the man who was leading a women's and then a men's Bible study. And at night, that Tuesday night, that's what he said. Yeah, we need to pray. He's in trouble. Yeah.
So, and like I mentioned earlier, when you talk about the Lord being in it all, that, if I would have been picked up by one of those Jolly Greens, I wouldn't have been there with your dad and those guys to be able to have a radio to help out. So, the Lord had it all planned as it was.
Yeah.
So we just spent probably 2 or 3 hours. And like I said, I would converse and tell them about the activity south of the river. And with a moonlit night, we could look out through the bushes and you could see the river just. And so your dad finally comes and goes, well, we've got to make a decision. If we stay here, we'll be found in the morning. And my thoughts then were, well, okay, just saw a couple of dead NVA bodies up there that if they get me, they're going to say, oh, you're the forward air controller that did all this stuff. And, I don't know if I'll be captured or shot. And he goes, the other choice is we can go across the river. But, he goes, you can see, or we can see the river, so you know that the North Vietnamese have people stationed all along the river that would just shoot anything that they see moving in the river. And he said, the last option is we go back from where we came from, because we knew that was a safe area, that they had moved down through it coming south from Quang Tri. So that's what we decided to do, is so your dad would leave, he would go scout and come back and say, okay, follow me.
Yeah.
So we just up into the first field, got into the next field after the second tree line, and as we were getting to the third tree line, that's when we came across those bomb craters. And I go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What had happened was Vietnam runs northwest to southeast. So when the ARVN Rangers started moving, they basically went straight south, meaning they went into all of the enemy activity that I had seen.
Yeah.
If they would have gone on a southeasterly heading, they would have avoided this stuff. Yeah. So I said, told your dad, I said, we have to head east, just get away from this area.
Yeah.
So it was probably, maybe an hour and a half before sunrise, and we passed the last tree line and got out into the open. And then we just started moving up north, and all of a sudden we came to a grave site. And the way the Vietnamese did it, because this was out on just the plains, with the Gulf right there, it's sort of like New Orleans, is that if you dug down probably 2 or 3 feet, it'd be water.
Yeah.
So they were raised platforms for where they did their burials, and they were round mounds.
Okay.
So we found one of those that had been abandoned because of the war. The people had left the little villages there, and it was all grown up with bushes.
Yeah.
So we crawl into the middle of this, and so, it was one of those things. As we started out our journey of heading up north, one of the last things I said to the FAC was, well, the forward air controller that was covering at night, said, well, we're about to start moving. I hope to talk to you in the morning, but I have no idea what's going to happen.
Wow.
So I will hopefully see you in the morning.
Yeah.
So we get up there, get into these grave sites, into this bushes, and so I get back up on the radio, and there's nothing. They had said, we'll be back at first light, but again, they were doing planning. They were trying to get all of the search and rescue forces together, and how, the plan that they wanted to do. Well, it just so happened at the time there were another forward air controller, but they flew jet fighters, flew F-4s. I think they were called Wolfpacks. So there was a Wolfpack, and the reason that they started using the fast-moving forward air controllers was that they would go up into North Vietnam, and so their survivability was a whole lot more than us slow-moving facts.
Yeah.
But he comes up on the radio and he goes, well, hey, I'm here. I'll just stay here until the other ones show up. So this Wolfpack probably spent an hour and a half to 2 hours with us. He went and had to refuel 2 or 3 times. But a couple of times, our position, we were up a little bit on a little rise,
Yeah.
and so we could see good to the north, or to the west, and we could see good to the south.
Yeah.
And to the west, just to our west, was an open field, and then there was a tree line, and all of a sudden we see about 3 or 4 NVA soldiers come out of that tree line and start coming across the field right to us.
Wow.
So I called up this Wolfpack and said, "Hey, you got our position." I said, "If you look just west in that field, you're going to see some folks coming across." And they had a 20 millimeter gun. And so he said, "I got him," and he rolled in and strafed. I don't know if he got any, but they turned around and went back. And so, that was one of the things. If I hadn't have spotted those bomb craters,
Yeah.
we probably would have walked right into that command post.
Right.
So then another interesting thing, as we were sitting there, south of us, we hear a whistle. And then, half a mile away, hear another one. And then these whistles just keep going and sort of merge. And all of a sudden, out of this southern tree line, here come 2 more NVA troops coming up to us. And, me not having the ground experience, as they start coming, I ask your dad, "Well, you guys going to shoot these guys?" And he goes, "No." I go, "What?" He goes, "If we do that, they will know right where we are. Because right now we're concealed. Nobody knows where we are." That's probably a good idea. It's a good thing I don't have a gun. But so these guys were actually just scouts.
Okay.
So they went by us and then just up to the north and over a ridge line. And I guess, they were just going to be watching to see what was happening on the South Vietnamese side. And finally, the slow fac moves up and shows up on station overhead. And so I start talking to him, and he said, "Well, the search and rescue forces are coming, and we'll come in to get you." So, but in the meantime, I had told him about, all of this stuff by the river and south of the river. So he just started putting in airstrikes.
Yeah.
And there was an ordnance mixture in Vietnam that was called Snake and Nape.
Okay.
What it was Mark 82s, which were 500-pound bomb that were high drag, where they had fins come out, really accurate munitions. And then Nape was napalm,
Right.
where, you would put a section on fire, of just burning stuff. So he started putting in airstrikes, and we were close enough where we could just hear the AAA shooting at them. So,
What's a AAA again?
Okay, that was anti-aircraft fire.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
The guns were shooting
Okay.
at them.
Okay.
And so I would just call that out of just, "Hey, they're shooting," to see, because if then airplanes overhead would spot it, you would just let them roll in on that target because they had eyes on where their position was. So, sometime in the morning, it wasn't too, but a group started coming off again from the right, from that tree line toward us. So what they did was they put napalm on that field to the right and napalm south of us.
Wow.
And it was close enough to where, momentarily with all that fire, it sort of took the oxygen out of the air.
Yeah.
But then finally the search and rescue forces show up, the Sandys, the A1s, with the helicopter. So I brief them and say, you know, come in, stay north of the tree line. I'm going to flash you, and I'm going to put out a marker. We had panels. They were orange panels, which were probably about 3 feet by 5 feet that you could put on the ground as to mark your position.
Yeah.
So as they come in, I see Sandy 1 and Sandy 2, and flash, we got your position. And they come in, and next thing I hear is, we've got to look around.
Oh, man.
And I go, no,
Oh, my gosh.
go get the helicopter and get us out of here. And got to look around. So they came in, and they turned south over the river, and then they turned east going back out to the sea. And so they're in a trail position where Sandy 1 is in front, Sandy 2 is behind, probably about 500 feet or so. And all of a sudden, I see these 2 corkscrew smoke trails come up, and, you know, then I called break, break. And they both started, but all of a sudden, both of these airplanes, I just see the front engines explode. And the next thing I see is pump 2 ejection seats go out and 2 chutes.
Yeah.
So now there's 2 more guys south of the river. That, and there was a little silence on the radio, and the forward air controller comes back up and goes, well, you're on hold. The search and rescue guys say they're going to get their pilots out first.
Wow.
And so that was a whole
Goodness.
another thing. And by now it was probably, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. So it probably took an hour or so. And those guys have amazing stories. And in fact, I am thinking about putting all this in a book.
Oh, I hope you do. Yeah.
That people over the years have said about that.
Yeah.
So we are then on hold.
Yeah.
And they did actually get those 2 guys out.
Yeah.
But the amazing part about it was after they were shot down, the Jolly Greens, because like I told you, weren't the most maneuverable helicopters, they said they weren't going to come in because it was too risky to be able to come in with both the AAA, the anti-aircraft fire, and then the missile.
Yeah.
Well, the FAC found an Army helicopter just probably about 30 miles south of where we were. There was a cavalry, an Army cavalry, armed cav base. And so they found what was called a UH-1, a Huey.
Yeah.
And so he came in and picked up both of those guys, dropped them off, and then on the way back, FAC goes, okay, we've got this Army helicopter who's coming in, and he's going to pick you up and then go. And somehow out of all of this, I guess I had never really let people know that, you know, it wasn't just, they thought that I was with some, you know, South Vietnamese.
Yeah.
So they were just really going to come pick me up and take me out.
Okay.
And so I go, well, wait a minute. I go,
Wow.
There's more of me down here. And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, there are 3 more Americans here. And, you know, you get us all, or I guess I'll be staying with these guys because I'm not going to give their position away.
Yeah.
And so, okay, wait a minute, this changes a few things. So what had actually changed, and then I told them about the 2 other Arvin. So, you know, with 6 of us there, we couldn't all fit together on one of the UH-1s. So they had to find another one, so they found another one. And so they come on the radio, and I brief them. Come in, north of the river, stay low. I'll have the panel out. I'll flash you. So they come in, and fact, we got your mirror, we got your panel. So they sat down, and this Joe Bergstrom and the two Arvin get on the lead helicopter, and myself and your dad and Lieutenant Nahay get on the second helicopter. And we lift off, and all of a sudden, they just start gaining altitude, and they start turning to the south to go over the river. And I'm pounding on the back of this guy going, no, go north and stay low. And he just points out the window, and I see lead ahead. And so, you know, it's, you know, as a flyer, you know, you're a wingman and you follow your lead.
Yeah.
So and that lead helicopter was probably maybe about a half a mile in front of us, maybe a quarter mile. And we crossed the river, and it sounds like the 4th of July. We're taking AAA fire like everything.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we get south of the river and see this corkscrew come up, and it just hits the lead airplane, and you just see it burst into a ball of flames and see the rotor come off and just head to the ground. Well, the pilot on our helicopter just basically auto-rotated, and for helicopters, what that means is they just pop the power, pull the pitch back, and just sort of drop out of the sky. So we just drop, and we are just low level. We're probably 50 feet above the trees.
Yeah.
And as we're heading south again, it's just all you hear is gunfire.
Yeah.
And we're actually going along pretty good.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, as I'm looking out, I was on the left side of the helicopter looking out the door. All of a sudden up ahead, I can't quite remember, it was 3 or 4 NVA tanks that we were about to fly right over.
Wow.
And I can still visualize and still see that all these guys, when they hear the helicopter, you can just see them, their heads turn. But the bad part about it was at least 1 or 2 of the tanks, the Russian tanks, had a 12.7 machine gun up on the top that they used. Well, at least 2 of the tanks had the machine gunners sitting right there. So as we flew over, just start hearing them shoot, and all of a sudden hear thud, thud, thud in the helicopter. And as I look up, in our airplanes, there's warning lights that go off when things go wrong. So we call them emergency lights, warning lights. And so on this UH-1, right along the glare shield, which was a little thing that stuck out, which provided some shade so you could see the instruments, but that's where the UH-1 had its emergency lights, its warning lights, and I see all these lights go on, and I go, well, if it means the same thing in a helicopter that it means in a fixed wing, we're not long for the sky.
Yeah.
And it probably was a minute or 2 later, we just auto-rotated into a rice paddy. The good thing about it was that line of tanks was at that time the southernmost extent of where the NVA were.
Okay.
So we basically, when we landed probably 2 to 3 miles south, were in good guy territory.
Okay.
And then the FAC found some Army Cobras, which were gunships that the Army used, helicopter gunships.
Okay.
And he found a 4-ship of those, and they came into the area, and they started just circling us. And they were there for our protection. If anything moved, they were going to shoot it. But then the FAC had to find another helicopter to come and pick us up. And he finally found an Army, it was an observation helicopter.
Okay.
It was called a Loach. And I forget exactly, an OH-1 or something like that was the designation. But this was, it couldn't carry a lot of folks. So, you know, there were the 3 of us, and then I think the helicopter there were 4 that were the crew. So what he did was he came in and he picked up your dad, Lieutenant Nahay, myself, and flew us probably about 5-6 miles farther south and dropped us off in an open area. And then he went back to get the other guys.
Oh, okay.
And in the meantime, they had found another UH-1, and they got him to come into our position.
Okay.
And so they picked us up and then took us down to the Cav base.
Wow.
So that, you know, it's one of those things to where, you know, you just, you know, as got older and then accepted the Lord, just, you know, his hand was in everything.
Yeah.
That he had a purpose that was going to be fulfilled, and, you know, that that's why it happened.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, Bill, for being there for my dad. And I'm so glad God used you to help save him. And I'm so glad that, you know, you made that prayer and you gave, you know, God that room to operate to completely transform your life, which you mentioned off air really happened 7 years later. This is going to be the hardest part of this interview is, could you just in like a couple of minutes just sort of tell us about your faith in Christ? Well, like I said, that's the hardest thing, but how can you sort of summarize that for someone who's listening and the difference that Christ has made in your life?
Well, you know, I want to say that, you know, after that happened and after saying that prayer, that, man, the light went on and I went to Jesus right away. But it wasn't, you know, we, and I'm going to say just another little sidelight was my wife was 6 months pregnant with our first boy at that time when that happened. So the Lord, you know, spared me to be able to see him and raise him. But I got off of active duty and went to be with the Guard in Battle Creek, Michigan, flying for them as a full-timer. And there was a few problems of just wanting to really, you know, we were going to church, but we had a little bit of difficulty to where my wife was one religion and I was another. And we went to talk to her pastor and mine, and we got 2 different stories. And so it just, again, a God thing. 2 of the guys that were in my Guard unit, one of them was a full-time with me, were very, very firm believers. And they were going to a Bible church at that time. Well, they invited Debbie, my wife, their wives, to go to a Bible study. So she started going to this Bible study with the 2, Chris and Wanda, and she came to know the Lord through that. I was still a little stubborn. But unbeknownst to me, this one guy said, "Hey, do you like to play racquetball?" So you know, I like. So he said, "Well, I've got a friend that, you know, likes to play too. Do you mind? We can do a threesome of racquetball." "No, that'll be fine." Well, he just happened to be the pastor of this Bible church.
That's great.
So,
That's great.
So we started playing racquetball together, and then Debbie and I said, "You know, why don't we just start going to this Bible church so we can go as a family. So we started going, and got into a Sunday school class by a very godly man by the name of Jim Weens, and really started growing. But there was going to be a Bill Gothard seminar up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and so Jim comes to us and said, where you guys are now, I really think you need to go to this. Well, that was back in the day when we didn't have a whole lot of money. And the interesting thing about it was about a day or two before the final yes, we get a refund check in the mail from our insurance company, which was the exact amount of the conference.
Wow.
The exact amount. So it's, well, I guess the Lord wants us to go.
Right.
So we attended this conference, and I don't know if you've ever been or ever heard, but the Saturday of the conference, toward the end, Bill Gothard goes over the plan of salvation. And, you know, do you want to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And so that is where I did it. And, you know, it was one of those things of just, you know, realizing that, you know, your life really isn't your own. And that when you finally realize, hey, what they say about being a sinner, I'm right there. I'm one of the chief sinners. So then, you know, we just spent, we spent about another 6 years there in Battle Creek, just growing. And I still remember, you know, finally having sermons that were out of the Bible instead of just reading a Bible verse and then just, you know, having a pastor just say personal stuff. But I still remember one of the first things after really starting to learn the Bible, read the Bible, was the story of Noah. And for all these years of growing, I knew the story of Noah. Hey, in the ark, saving these animals, and then, you know, God saved them. But the rainbow of did not have any idea that the rainbow meant that God was never going to flood the earth again, that he was never going to destroy everything on it, that he had something else that'll be coming. But so it was just, you know, just amazing to just do it. And so we left Battle Creek, and we went down to Shreveport, Bossier, Louisiana. And so we became part of a Bible church there, which was just a growing church. When we first started going, there were probably about 50 people. But started teaching Sunday school. We started teaching kids at first, and then I did a high school Bible, you know, the Sunday school. And we started going on some mission trips, got to go down to Mexico for a few times. And, you know, so it's then just trying to walk with the Lord and serve him in whatever capacity that we find ourselves. And then when we moved to Norman, Oklahoma now, we are in a church, Wildwood Community Church there, where, again, the same thing of just leading a care group, teaching kids, being on the missions board to be able to support missionaries worldwide, and have gone on a couple of mission trips there down to Brazil and over to Latvia. So of just, you know, wherever the Lord goes and whatever the Lord leads us to do, you know, that's what we want to try to do and be faithful. And, you know, I can't say that, you know, still sin, still there, still have to ask forgiveness. That's why 1 John 1:9, you know, if you confess your sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us. And you go from there. But the big focus, and one of those things to where faith, seeing what you really, or believing what you really can't see.
Yeah.
But it's real, and the Lord Jesus Christ will help you out.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. All right. Well, Bill Jankowski, thank you for being here with us today and sharing these stories. I think they are really important. I hope you do get to write that book. So we're really glad to, just have you document that for us too, as you share with us, and then as you write down your thoughts. And I've enjoyed my dad's, writing down and getting thoughts just to have a better understanding. And then just ultimately it's, from my perspective as a 6-year-old kid in 1972, just looking back and just being so grateful for God's plan. And as I've said, when I was talking to my mom and dad, I know that wasn't the plan for everybody. I know God didn't answer all the prayers the way that we would want to have them answered, but I still see God at work, and I pray for those people that still have those wounds and those hurts and are maybe angry at God. Maybe, well, why? Great for you, but why didn't God send a Bill Jankowski out of the sky for my dad, or whatever the case may be? And I pray for them, just because God is so much bigger than our prayer requests that we want answered a certain way. Do you want to say something to close us out?
Yeah, I was just going to say that just last weekend I was in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And it was to attend a memorial service for one of the electronic warfare officers that was on Bat 21.
Whoa.
And that airplane has never been found. So his family has never had remains to be able to bury.
Yeah.
But there were 6 kids there, brothers and sisters. And so I got to meet them.
Yeah.
And after the ceremony, we probably spent an hour and a half to 2 hours of just going over, allowing them to ask questions.
Yeah.
And being able to try to help them get some closure.
Yeah.
And there's an organization, I don't know if you know, but called Gold Star Families.
Yes, my dad has talked about it. Yes.
Which is, trying to help people out, families out of those that have lost loved ones in the war.
Yeah.
So it was a really, really great time to be able to let them know what I saw.
Yeah.
And, to just let them know that their dad was a hero.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good, Bill. All right. Well, thank you again so much for sharing what you could with us today. I want to remind you, for me, just understanding how even just seeing prayer works, and then it's just so great to hear Bill Jankowski's sort of perspective and just get extra details and different layers of the story. And knowing that ultimately God is at work, that gives me a great, great hope. And so I want to remind you of whatever it takes for you to think of that hope that God has done in your life. Just take some time, take some moments and think, wow, God did this for me. Maybe it was 20 years ago. Maybe it was almost 50 years ago. Maybe it was 2 days ago. Maybe you've just forgotten something. It's so easy just to get on with life and forget that, wow, God came through for me yesterday. God did this thing. So I want to encourage you just to sit back and say, Jesus, you've done a lot for me. And think of 3 specific things, whether it's very recent, a long time ago. Just thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Take in that great hope that we have. And out of that great hope, we want to be very bold. And that's what Bill Jankowski has been, and that's what we're trying to be. And we'll close this with the show. And you can reach out to me, steve@verybold.com. You can email me, steve@verybold.com. But we close, we think about the Apostle Paul, and we think about all the difficult things and the times that he should have been killed for his faith and was spared until he was finally executed for his belief in Jesus Christ. we think about Paul and how he talks about that great hope, and we think about his boldness and Bill Jankowski's boldness and my mom and dad's boldness and now your boldness. Think about that great hope. 2 Corinthians 3:12. Therefore, since we have such a hope, we are very bold.